Hi, everybody. This is Doug Reeves at Creative Leadership Solutions. I'm so pleased that you could join us. So let me get my time zone straight. Good day to you in the West, good afternoon in the East, good evening in our Gulf states friends, Africa, Europe. And if you're awake in Asia right now, go back to sleep because you should be getting some rest and not listening to me. But for everybody else, very, very happy to be with you. I promise to make this a good use of your time, and as we always do, we'll make the slides available to you at the end of this presentation. You're always free to share those with colleagues. I'm also recording this webinar, so if you want to share both the video, the audio, as well as the handouts, you're very free to do so. We want to make sure that we're of service to you. So the topic for today is leading in uncertain times. You can submit questions using the chat function if you wish. That's typically on the right-hand side of your screen. But for some people, you may be more comfortable, particularly if you're on just the audio version, texting me. And the text, which you can see on your screen, but you probably can't see if you're audio only, so stand by for the number. It's country code 1, then 781-710-9633. That's country code 1, then 781-710-9633. Please feel free at any time during our discussion today to use the chat function or text, whatever's more comfortable for you, to communicate with me. So let's get to work. Here is an overview of what I would like to be able to accomplish today. I'll say a few words about the impact of the new administration in a way that I hope will surprise you, maybe or maybe not pleasantly. We'll talk about the opposite of uncertainty, and that's enduring values. It would be naive not to recognize that one of the things that motivated you to sign up for this webinar today is pervasive uncertainty, not just with respect to educational policy, but economic conditions, political conditions, and so on. I'm going to ask for you to reconsider that frame of mind, and rather than focus only on uncertainty, consider what is certain, and that is your enduring values. I'll be asking you to share some of those in a moment, and then I'll share what I hear from you on the screen. I want to share with you some very interesting research on the craving for certainty and what that craving for certainty does to learning, what that does for decision making, and what it does for our mental models. I am as guilty as anybody wanting to have things settled. And so it seems to me that I have to recognize that as a potential limitation on my broader understanding that comes with the acceptance of uncertainty. Finally, we'll talk about some opportunities for using these uncertain times to make some really positive changes in redefining educational accountability. And I'll talk about how we can offer some help. I would just say, for anybody who's on the fence as to whether or not to stay to the end, I'm going to talk about free support for grant writing, including some brand new January 2017 grant writing evidence that I hope you will find useful. Because we understand that money is tight, and we want to help you find revenue sources, not just talk about expense sources. We'll have plenty of time at the end for discussion and questions. So with that, let's get it underway. On your screen, you'll see the text from the latest book on the new administration's educational policies. And forgive me for those of you who have a screen as I read this, because people who only have audio won't see it. So bear with me for just a second while I read the text. The President-elect's educational policies will have a profound impact on you. The policies of the new administration represent a significant change in the instruments of government, money, public policy, public opinion, and political power. The new administration can be counted upon to broaden the definition of choice to include incentives for parent choice, even without the use of school vouchers. Parents will have more choice within school systems, as well as between traditional public schools and publicly funded charter schools. The nominee for Secretary of Education said, "We actually have teachers, administrators, and local business people competing to see who can do the best job of teaching poor kids how to read." Now, that's the sort of competition we like to see. The story behind this quotation is that my publisher called me in December saying, "We've got a new administration, you've got 4 weeks to turn around a new book explaining to people what the new administration's educational policies will be all about." So I did that, except what I haven't told you is the following. That phone call took place in December of the year 2000. The new administration was George W. Bush. The new Secretary of Education designate was Rod Page. And the publication in January of 2001, 16 years ago this month, was called Crusade in the Classroom, How George W. Bush's Education Reforms Will Affect Your Children, Our Schools, published by Simon & Schuster. Now, I don't pull this one on you to imply that changes are not significant. But I do want to suggest this is not your first rodeo, friends. You've been through change before. You've been through at least 16 years of change. And a lot of the sort of things that you saw in that quotation just 30 seconds ago are the sort of thing that people in some quarters are saying represents brand new and dramatic changes now. It doesn't. And one of the things that we have to recall is that of all the financial influence on educational policy, federal funding is a tiny fraction of that. I'm not saying it's insignificant, but I'm saying that the people on this call represent far and away the greatest impact on educational policy, and that's people in schools, in districts, in regional authorities, as well as in states. So it seems to me that the greatest change is not necessarily in the U.S. Department of Education, although I'm sure that they will be promulgating policies, as will every new department in the administration. However, I want to keep this into perspective. The greatest change already happened, and that was in December of 2015, when majorities of both parties, majorities in the Senate and the House of Representatives, passed the Every Student Succeeds Act, with the Republican chairman of the Senate Education Committee, as well as the ranking Democratic members, as well as the Democratic president, came together to sign this landmark legislation that essentially turned back 16 years of micromanagement at the federal level, in fact made it illegal to have both penalties and incentives, and opens the door for meaningful accountability systems. And by meaningful, I mean not accountability systems that are gotchas, but rather ones that genuinely engage in innovation and experimentation. And the price of that innovation and experimentation will be rapid reporting so that all of us can benefit. Learning not in a hierarchical way from one level of headquarters to the next, but rather from school to school, district to district, state to state. And honestly, I find that one of the best things that's happened in policy in a very long time. And that happened last year, actually, December of 2015, not in the last few weeks. So now I want to pose a question to you. Everyone's concerned about uncertainty, but I also want to ask what the opposite of uncertainty is. That is specifically, what are the enduring values that have sustained your educational commitments in the past? So please use the chat function or the text function change, and remember that policies change, values endure, and tell me in just a few words what your enduring values turn out to be. I'll give you 60 seconds, and then I'll put some of these on the board. Please take about 30 more seconds to share with me what your vision of your enduring values are, that is, that are going to happen no matter what the administration says, no matter what the political and economic conditions are. And let's come back together in our large group. It's interesting, I looked at some of the demographics that we have in our audience, and we have people from very urban areas and very rural. And by very rural, I mean K-12 is about 250 students. and yet there's remarkable commonality among you. Several of you said children first. You said that evidence is better than opinion. We want to engage in learning to learn. I also thought it was very interesting that we have people from outside of the U.S. who talked about thinking critically by evaluating claims against evidence. Those are the sort of things that, whether or not politics change, whether or not economic conditions change, are the enduring values. And as you confront people in your communities, maybe on your staff and colleagues, who are concerned about uncertainty, start with what does not change. In fact, I would even argue that rule number one of any change process is being really clear about what does not change. So with that in mind, let's think about what the craving for certainty rather does and its impact on learning. This is some research that I did as part of preparation for today's discussion, and I found it absolutely fascinating. The example that I found most compelling had to do with learning a language. For example, a very famous language teacher based in London used to teach for 30, 40 years based on what we might today in the 21st century call the Google Translate mode. Learn the vocabulary, learn the declensions, mimic the sentences that are in the dialogues. So pretty much every American studying German can ask where the Bahnhof is. Everybody studying French can ask many, many years after the Surgeon General said stop smoking where the Bureau de Tabac is. We can all say konnichiwa. We can all say zaijian. We can all say jambo. Let the imagination flow. But all of those have the limitation of essentially substituting English word for a word in Japanese, in Swahili, in French, and so on. What this language teacher discovered was that a fill-in-the-blank method was far and away better than simply memorizing equivalents of language in terms of vocabulary, declensions, and grammatical structures. In fact, how much better was it? He had an inkling that this was better, but I don't think that he understood until further studies revealed that it was 20 times faster to learn by filling in the blanks based on what we already knew, rather than waiting for the certainty of vocabulary, waiting for the certainty of grammatical rules. In other words, this sort of model of filling in the blanks has a profound impact not only for lowering anxiety about uncertainty, but for dramatically increasing our learning. Let me move outside of the realm of language acquisition and consider a different idea. Now, you can have a literal interpretation or a fill-in-the-blank interpretation of each one of these. Let's assume, for example, that you get a note that says, "Dear taxpayer." That makes my veins run with ice-cold blood, except when I finished the rest of it, I found out that they were actually talking about money that they owed me instead of the other way around. When you're told, this is going to hurt a little bit, you might be a little bit alarmed, or we got buy-in from everybody, which means that the buy-in really didn't happen at all. So I want to suggest that there are ways that we can do much better. Take, for example, yet a third context. This one comes from the world of art. Everybody likes Michelangelo, but take a look at the following diagram. I'm going to give you just about 30 seconds and tell me what you see. So everybody's got the moment of creation, the godlike figure on the right, Adam on the left, and you can draw whatever theological implications you want to from this, except for one thing. And I've seen this up close. I've lingered in the Sistine Chapel and marveled at what I saw because I was focused on the literal details. What I didn't allow, like the wonderful language teacher in London, was my brain to fill in the blank. In fact, what I quite literally mean is the brain. Look at the outline of the figure on the right. We know that Michelangelo was a party to some classes that allowed people to dissect bodies and look deep inside the interior of the brain. And that figure circling the godlike figure on the right is very, very similar to a cross-section of the human brain. I only use that illustration to say when we're open to avoiding seeking immediate certainty and willing to fill in the blank with other knowledge that we have, we can make sense out of nonsense. We can make sense out of what hitherto might have been uncertainty. And it's a good model for the other things that we face in education. So let's go from the theoretical to the practical. I want to offer to you some practical ways that we can deal with uncertainty. You know, it's been kind of a byword for a long time to talk about valuing diversity, and of course we should. As the examples I gave with language earlier suggest, that when we have students who are multilingual, they have greater opportunities to deal with uncertainty, to fill in the blanks, and each new language is not a greater challenge. In fact, it becomes something that they're better able to deal with as time goes along. But I want to suggest that we think not only of external diversity, diversity of race and ethnicity and language, but think of internal diversity as well. For example, when I'm working with school leadership teams and I notice that they're all strategic thinkers, but nobody is strong in execution, or everybody's great at execution, that's how they got to their present position, but nobody has very good relationship skills, it is a prescription for disaster. The truth is we need diversity that we see on the inside as well as what we see on the outside. And that means people with strength in vision, in relationships, in management, as well as in strategy. Think about language immersion. Here's another counterintuitive thing that I learned, and I hope every time I come before you I can say, here's something I thought was true and I turned out to be wrong. Here's another example. If you were asking me to put my child in a language immersion program, I'd say, well, maybe, but hey, no more than 50%. They still have to be able to speak English, and that's got to be the mother tongue, and that's what we have to focus on. Except the facts got in the way. 90% language immersion programs, this particular example had to do with Mandarin immersion, wound up having a better effect not only on Mandarin, not only on English, but even on mathematics. Who would have thought? And that means, to be clear, mathematics when tested in English. In other words, deep immersion, getting us way outside of our comfort zone for both parents and students, turned out to be practical as well as theoretically good to help our kids deal with uncertainty. Here's another counterintuitive ideas. Generally, the byword these days is the more choice you have, the better off it's going to be for kids. Let's not go too fast there. Turns out that by offering lots of choices, kids don't broaden their horizons, but sometimes they narrow them. They gravitate to the least common denominator. They gravitate to their comfort zone. Whereas a narrow curriculum choice, one of the schools that I just visited last night, for example, has every single student taking art. Every single student plays a sport. Every single student has music, as well as the other traditional curriculum choices. A more narrow curriculum actually gains greater diversity of thought, exactly the opposite of what many parents might have presupposed. It means deliberately valuing the immigrant experience. Another fascinating study that I read getting ready for this afternoon was the commonality of all manner of great thinkers. They used Margaret Mead as one of many examples, who actually were first or second generation to their country. And then the suggestion is, when we think of immigrants, let's not just think of immigrants from one border nationally to another. Let's think of from rural to urban, or vice versa. Let's think of cultural immigration and regional immigration. By valuing these sources, we can help everybody around that cultural or regional or linguistic immigrant think of how to deal with uncertainty. And as a leadership perspective, one of the things that I want to encourage all of you to require this year is what I would call mutually exclusive decision alternatives. That means don't settle for somebody coming to you and saying, here it is, principal, superintendent, chief academic officer, take it or leave it. Here it is, state superintendent, the staff all agrees, take it or leave it. But rather require decision alternatives, each one of which has advantages and disadvantages. By demanding diversity of thought, by demanding diversity of opinion, as well as maybe contradictory evidence, we all become better critical thinkers, and it makes us more equipped to deal with uncertainty. So let's again stay very practical. When we think about uncertainty and dealing with it well, it also is directly related, the research tells us, to creativity and critical thinking. One of the themes that you see in the research, for example, are what the authors called demystifying experiences. And that means taking something that might have been so alienating that it might have been threatening and breaking it apart, just as we can with language. Staying with the original example, why was that London language teacher so successful, 20 times faster than others? Because he took the position that you don't have to learn a brand new vocabulary that's completely alien. You already know. Think of all the English language words that have roots in the Romance language, roots in the Germanic languages, and so on. By emphasizing what people already knew, he engaged students in what he called demystifying experiences, which made learning much more rapid and much more accessible. They suggest that we expand the boundaries of normality and create what researchers called cognitive flexibility, different ways of thinking about things, and of course challenging our comfort zone. And that means that we have more than music students and music experts in music classes, more than supposed artistically talented kids in art classes, more than just the athletically gifted kids in our sports programs. So let's get down to the nitty-gritty in 2017. How do we deal with uncertainty in 2017 educational policies? One of the most significant shifts that I'm seeing in the last 6 weeks is with new documents that I've seen from university levels as well as from governmental funders, is a shift from effect-based accountability, typically annual tests, to cause and effect models. That is, linking very specifically what the relationship is between what teachers and leaders do and what students are able to do. That has a dramatic impact on shifting how you are going to be able to succeed in, for example, educational innovation grants. It's not going to be enough to say test scores are going to increase 3 years from now. We have to talk about how we link and measure cause-based variables, time, curriculum, formative assessment, and so on, with effect-based variables, not just annual test scores, but formative assessments that we can observe all along the way. And it most significantly means a change from the traditional experimental control model. That is, I'll take a group of your schools, then I'll match them to a group that look demographically similar of other schools and see if your group, the experimental group, is evidencing statistically significant differences from the control group, that is the other schools. But here's a problem. What if those other schools have a lot of different variables, like different teachers, different collective bargaining agreements, different financial support, different parent and community support? It's crazy. What we think is a control group, no matter how randomly assigned, is in fact not a control group at all, but vastly different from the experimental group. And so you wind up with this conundrum of, well, if they're similar to one another, then I guess that means all of your labors were in vain. None of the leadership and teaching things that you tried meant anything. And if they are significantly different, people will say, well, they may have been different, but it was different because of all those other external variables. It's a no-win situation. The new model is same student to same student. And that means not comparing the spring of 2017 to the spring of 2018 to the spring of 2019, but rather it means comparing right now, in the winter of 2017 to the spring of 2017. It means next year, not waiting until 2018, but the fall of 2017 to the winter of 2017. Same kids, in the same system, with the same teachers, with the same collective bargaining agreement, with the same per pupil funding, the same parent and community support. Now that's the kind of research that we can be accountable for, that really makes educational accountability less of a gotcha and more of something that we can all believe in. So how do we redefine accountability? First of all, we narrow the interval between comparisons. A year in the life of a third grader, a fourth grader, fifth grader is a different geological era. We need to be talking in months, even weeks, not years of differences. The closer those intervals are, the more likely the student is to have had very similar conditions, including, most importantly, the same teacher, the same academic leader. It increases the credibility of student results because when we're focusing on those tight intervals, there's much more likely to be a tight relationship between the curriculum that is taught and the curriculum that is assessed. And it's fair to say, without asking for a show of hands out there, that there's a pretty wide gap between what is taught and what is assessed right now, no matter what kind of standards your particular jurisdiction has adopted. We can improve the precision of defining teaching and leadership objectives. That means, for example, as I saw a district just last week do, identifying specifically how has our schedule changed, how has our intervention changed, how has our response to individual student learning needs changed, and they can compare that now to 6 months ago, 9 months ago, 12 months ago. And most importantly, it moves us away from the illusion of certainty, which is what everybody craves, but nobody really has, to cycles of hypothesis testing. This may or may not work, but let's give it a try, and the sooner we learn whether that hypothesis is validated, the sooner we can continue to make improvements, or we can try something else. So let me finally shift to some ways that I think my colleagues and I at Creative Leadership Solutions can be very specifically helpful to you. Number one, we are offering free technical assistance for grant applications. My colleague, Dr. Howie Knuff, has been an expert in this area, helping states, regional authorities, and individual districts and schools apply for and gain federal grants. And this is the most challenging time we've ever had. Last year's boilerplate won't do it. We've got to make sure that we're using the latest January 2017 evidence and grant guidance to get those. Secondly, we can help on accountability system design. Long before this new grant guidance came out, for more than the last 20 years, we have been advocates of what we called holistic accountability. That is accountability that included both quantitative and qualitative indicators, that included both effect and cause-based accountability indicators. This started in the 90s with the first publication of Accountability in Action, a blueprint for learning organizations, now a publication in its third edition and still widely used in 2017. I think it's going to become more popular as we continue to learn more and the entire country goes to holistic rather than effect-based accountability. We're going to move from drive-by professional development to deep implementation, coaching, and support. And specifically what that means is for every day of a traditional workshop, 3 days of implementation, coaching, and support. That means you can't have ego involvement in how big the audience is. Sometimes the most important audience is one, maybe a team. It's my 9th grade math team, Doug, that really needs to get together. It's my kindergarten team that's really struggling with collaboration. It's not just a big group all the time as traditionally done in professional development. And of course, we're also offering lots of free resources, including videos, research, leadership assessments, and I'm particularly pleased to tell you that the best teacher observation rubric out there, done by Kim Marshall of the Marshall Memo, is also available. Kim has made this available for free, and if you are suffering under the weight of a telephone book-like observation that is confrontational and ineffective, it's time to make a change. And we can offer you for free leadership assessments and teacher assessments that are better than what you're using right now. In other words, there's lots of opportunities to move away from the paralysis of uncertainty toward what I think can be most effective for your school and district. I want to now welcome your chat questions either on the text, as you see in front of you, or the chat function. But I'll just close by saying the following. I know that people tend to want to say, well, let's wait and see, Doug. Let's see what the administration will do. Let's see what the new Secretary of Education will do. Wait a minute. Under what conceivable scenario will your leadership not be important? Under what political or economic scenario is the high expectation of students going to be unimportant? Will formative assessment be unimportant? Will effective feedback be unimportant? My encouragement to you is not to wait for things to be resolved, because they won't be. 4 years, 8 years, 16 years from now, people will still be talking about uncertainty. But you can do things today that have a powerful impact on behalf of your students. So I want to invite you to use the chat function or the text function to raise questions or challenges, and I'll be happy to respond to those in the moments that we have left. Okay, here's one. Where can we find the free videos and research? I'm sorry, I guess I should have mentioned that. It's at creativeleadership.net. That's creativeleadership.net, and you'll find under resources quite a large number of videos and articles and so on that you're most welcome to, as well as quite a few blog posts. One that we've had a lot of requests for is one from last year called the Getting Them Ready Myth. That may be fodder for a really interesting discussion at your next meeting. Oh, the question is, where do we find the information on free grant technical assistance? I want to give it to our grant writer. We are really happy to help you on that. All you need to do is you can, now that I've got your question, I'll be able to respond to that personally, and we'll make sure that you get that. Hey, thanks so much for remembering the leadership and learning matrix. Sometimes I forget that the leadership and learning matrix has a lot of enduring qualities, and maybe I should have used it today. For those of you who are not familiar with it, I'll just bring to mind that on the vertical axis, that's the achievement of results. On the horizontal axis, that's how teachers and leaders achieve those results. And most of our accountability mechanisms in the last 20 years have focused only on the vertical axis. That is, what are the test scores? But they don't give you very revealing answers about how those test scores were achieved. So by looking at both the horizontal, what teachers and leaders do, and the vertical, what student achievement is, we get much deeper insight. So thanks for noticing that. Here's an interesting policy question that I want to address, and that is the issue of choice within the public sphere versus choice between public and private. I realize we may have both public and private educators, and we certainly have international educators in this audience. So without making a value judgment, let me suggest the following. Public education makes a big public relations mistake when they imply the only way to get choice is with a voucher or a charter. We can create all kinds of choice within a public system, and I've seen that done. Choices of curriculum, choices of the way that we report on student progress, choices about the way that we engage parents and community members. I think instead of seeing choice as an enemy, we ought to be embracing choice and see that as something that we can offer, as well as any of the other alternatives that parents may or may not be considering. And we know that no matter what happens in the new administration, the vast majority of students are going to be in public systems. And therefore, it's incumbent upon us to not behave like the old phone company, where that was the only choice you had, but behave like today's phone companies, where there's lots of competition and lots of choices, and we're always trying to bring our message to the public that we want to respect different ways that students learn, different ways that parents want to be engaged. Thanks for raising a really thoughtful point. Another question. You said, talk about qualitative data and how to make it reliable. This is really important. And I say this as somebody whose bent is quantitative analysis, that is measuring things. But sometimes we outsmart ourselves. We have the illusion with quantitative methodologies that there's a difference between, let's take the obvious one, the students who's a 3.9995 and the student who's a 3.9994, because after all, the quantitative data show that that difference is real. No, it isn't. That's a completely meaningful difference. It's in statistical terms, a distinction without a difference. What we need to think about is how we can use qualitative data that is as accurate, as reliable as quantitative data is. And here's the way that you can do that. For example, if I have a 4-level rubric, 4, 3, 2, 1, you can use whatever language attached to 4, 3, 2, 1 that you want. And 80% of teachers looking at a piece of student work agree this piece of work is a 3, or that piece of work is a 2, or another piece of work is a 4. My reliability is 0.8. That is 4 out of 5 teachers, 80%, really clear. Consider the distinction between that and the same group of teachers who are using things like grade point averages to look at calculating a score, and they have not 80% agreement, but nearly 0 agreement on what the student final grade ought to be. In the case of grades, they think they're reliable because it's quantitative, but they were actually more reliable, more accurate, more consistent when they had a qualitative rubric-based analysis. In other words, the distinction on reliability is not whether it's quantitative or qualitative. The distinction is how consistent, how accurate are we in assessing student performance. And by the way, that has to do not just with assessing kids, but with assessing adults as well. More questions on grant writing. We'll respond to you personally on that, and I promise that we'll give you individual support. Here's another question. What have you learned to motivate superintendents who prefer to maintain the status quo? I would honestly say that maintaining the status quo is an illusion. I'll have people say, well, gee, Doug, we're just not ready for that yet. As your question thoughtfully says, many superintendents claim that they care about raising achievement for all students, but their behavior shows otherwise because, after all, they don't want to upset the apple cart. I get that. But honestly, the status quo is an illusion. A change is, I know it sounds trite to say, but is a constant. And when people think that they're defending the status quo, in fact, what they're defending is not a system stasis. They're defending their own comfort zone. And the world is passing them by. So it's not whether change or no change are the options. That's an illusion. The options are between effective change that is consistent, focused, and productive based upon a cycle of hypothesis testing, and ineffective change that is frantic tail chasing, going after one fad or the other. But there is no option called staying the same. Unless you want to repeal the laws of thermodynamics, we're all slowing down, and there is no such thing as the absence of change. Well, we have come to I promised you 45 minutes, and we're coming right up on that time frame. I want to, number one, thank you for making part of your day that you're willing to share with me. And second, reaffirm my offer to share with you all of the handouts as well as the research that you'll find at creativeleadership.net. And most importantly, if we can help you with respect to grant applications, accountability system design, and the new cycle of innovation that I think is going to really bode well for schools, states, and systems, then we'd love to be a part of that, and we'd welcome the opportunity for one-on-one conversation with you. Thanks for joining us. Have a great rest of the day.